Hello everyone, welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel north, far beyond the boundaries of warmth and comfort, to a land where daylight fades into endless twilight, and silence has a weight of its own. This is Alaska, vast, unforgiving, and haunted by stories that have slipped between the cracks of official record. From the frozen coastlines of the Bering Sea to the desolate tundra of the Yukon Valley, countless travelers, hunters, and locals have vanished without trace. Their names appear in missing persons logs, their photographs tacked to bulletin boards and small-town ranger stations, but their fates lost to the wilderness. These are not legends. They are documented accounts, drawn from police files, witness statements, and recovered evidence. And together, they paint a chilling portrait of a land that doesn't forgive mistakes, and sometimes doesn't let go. Now, settle in and prepare yourself as we uncover the darkness that dwells in 7 true, most disturbing Alaskan horror stories. In early June 2017, 4 experienced climbers, Michael Turner, age 37, an Anchorage-based mountaineer, Emma Wallace, 33, a wilderness photographer, Trent Lawson, 35, a backcountry medic, and Jared Cole, 29, a university geologist, set out to summit Denali, the crown of North America's peaks. Their route followed the West Buttress, the same line used by most expeditions, but their goal wasn't fame. Michael planned to document changes in the glacier patterns and film a short documentary on the human limits of endurance. They reached Base Camp 2 on June 7th, a barren plateau buried in snow and cloud. Fellow climbers described the group as focused, calm, and well-prepared. Emma was last seen loading film into her vintage Nikon, while Michael checked their satellite beacon. That night, the mountain was swallowed by fog so dense it erased the horizon. Their final radio call came on June 8th at 7:46 a.m. Michael reported strong katabatic winds and poor visibility. His voice was steady but strained, as if competing with roaring static. It was the last anyone ever heard from them. 3 days later, their tracker stopped transmitting. Frozen mid-signal, somewhere near Denali Pass, a place climbers call the Zone of Silence. When the team failed to check in by June 10th, the Alaska Mountaineering Rangers initiated a Level 3 search. Helicopters from Talkeetna Base took off at dawn, but the mountain refused to reveal its secrets. Dense fog, shifting winds, and sharp ice ridges forced the pilots to turn back after barely 30 minutes in the air. Ground units were dispatched, but reaching Denali Pass required days of climbing through unstable crevasses and avalanche zones. Rangers discovered fragments of torn nylon tents, a single climbing glove, and half-buried oxygen canisters. Nothing indicated a fall. It looked more like a sudden abandonment. Rescue Coordinator Lieutenant Ben Rourke later described it in his report. It was as if they simply walked away from camp. The recovered tent contained Turner's waterproof field journal. The final entry, dated June 8th, 8:12 p.m., read only, "Winds rising again. Trent says he heard voices outside. Can't be. Altitude's messing with us." The handwriting grew erratic, the ink smudged from condensation. Beneath the last line, someone had drawn 3 vertical slashes. No explanation, no initials. That entry would become one of the strangest pieces of evidence in Denali's history. On June 12th, at 2:37 a.m., Denali Base Camp picked up a weak distress signal on a non-standard radio frequency. An outdated VHF emergency band, not used since the early 2000s. The voice was faint, distorted by interference, but one phrase stood out clearly: "Don't follow the lights." The message repeated twice before fading into static. Technicians confirmed the transmission originated from within a 2-mile radius of Denali Pass, precisely where the Turner team had last pinged their beacon. By sunrise, a specialized rescue team began ascending the pass. They carried infrared scanners, but the results were baffling. For brief intervals, heat signatures appeared, faint, human-sized shapes, and then vanished instantly. The readings were dismissed as thermal illusions caused by drifting ice. Still, one ranger, Eli Marston, later told local reporters he heard faint radio clicks near a frozen ledge, like someone keying a mic but saying nothing. The official report classified it as interference from a storm system, but those who heard the broadcast claimed the voice was unmistakably Michael Turner's. The search zone was expanded, but no bodies, no footprints, and no further signals were ever found. 2 weeks later, a secondary search crew located Emma Wallace's camera frozen inside a block of compacted ice about half a mile downslope. The Nikon was damaged, but the memory card remained intact. Investigators thawed it under controlled lab conditions. There were 38 photographs. The first 20 showed standard climbing progress: tents, rope setups, sunrise over the ridge. The final 6 were taken at night. The images revealed a strange glow in the fog, circular and pale blue, appearing to float several meters above the snow. The last picture was completely black, except for faint streaks of red along the frame's bottom edge, possibly blood. Forensic analysts found no sign of manipulation. The timestamps matched the night of their disappearance. When the photos were released to the Turner family, Michael's wife reportedly refused to look, saying she'd heard him describe similar lights before during a previous Denali ascent 5 years earlier. Authorities ruled the images inconclusive atmospheric distortions. But locals, especially veteran climbers, whispered another name for them: the Denali orbs, a phenomenon said to appear before storms and before deaths. On June 28th, Ranger Eli Marston volunteered to descend Denali Pass alone to retrieve debris reported by satellite imaging. His body cam captured 2 hours of footage before abruptly cutting off. The recovered clips show Marston walking through heavy fog, whispering into his mic. Visibility 10 feet, hearing something like wind through metal. Then, a distant hum grows louder. Snow whirls violently, and faint lights appear moving between the ridges, rhythmic, deliberate. At the 142 mark, Marston mutters, "They're moving uphill." Seconds later, the camera jerks downward. His final words are barely audible. "Not wind, not wind." Searchers found the camera 5 days later embedded in ice. Lens cracked, microphone crushed. Marston's body was never recovered. The Park Service classified his death as presumed hypothermia, despite no body and no sign of his gear. The footage was sealed under internal review, though several rangers who saw it claimed there were human shapes in the fog behind him, walking in formation. In July, a melt revealed part of the Turner expedition's base camp too beneath a thin layer of ice. Inside, food supplies were untouched, but sleeping bags were ripped open as if slashed from the inside. Investigators discovered 3 journals, one belonging to Emma, one to Jared, and a smaller pocket notebook from Trent. Trent's final entry read, "Heard talking again. Emma says it's the wind, but I saw movement near the ridge, tall figures, no gear, no face shields. When I called out, they turned together. Like one body, Emma's notes became erratic, repeating the phrase, 'They're calling Michael by name.' Jared's final words, scrawled in graphite, were the most chilling. 'Don't look into the light. It remembers faces.'" The recovered notebooks were sent to the Anchorage Field Lab for analysis. Chemical tests confirmed exposure to extreme cold, no ink manipulation. Whatever they saw that night, it was enough to drive trained climbers into panic. The official investigation concluded by August 2017 with no remains recovered. Internal reports from the National Park Service described the incident as weather-induced disorientation leading to probable fatal exposure. But privately, rescuers admitted the evidence didn't fit the pattern of a blizzard death. The untouched food, deliberate writing, and missing bodies contradicted all logic. Local pilot Eric Danner, who flew several search missions, claimed he saw a flickering light hovering above Denali Pass during a clear evening flight. He described it as not lightning, not aircraft, more like an old lantern swinging in fog. The recording from his cockpit, however, mysteriously failed to capture the event. By September, funding for extended recovery was withdrawn. The Turner team's case file was closed, labeled Unresolved Disappearance. In Alaska's archives, it became just another entry, case number 17-082-DNP, one of hundreds in the mountain's long history of vanishings. But something about this one lingered. Rangers who participated refused to speak publicly, some even transferring out of Denali within months. In October 2018, 16 months after the disappearance, a hiker found a weatherproof field recorder wedged in glacial ice near McKinley River Basin, roughly 20 miles from the original site. It was traced back to Turner's expedition. The recorder contained over an hour of audio. The first 40 minutes captured environmental sounds, wind, snow, gear shifting. Then, a conversation began. Michael's voice. "They're closer now. Emma, don't turn your light on them. Trent, there's 3, maybe 4. A pause, then static. Finally, a male voice, distant, whispering, "You shouldn't be here." After that, the recording ends with a sound resembling a heartbeat fading into nothing. Audio experts found no digital tampering. When enhanced, the whisper's waveform matched neither Michael's nor Jared's voice. The file was archived, but never released to the public. Its existence was confirmed only through a leaked internal memo titled Denali Incident Audio, Restricted. In the years following the Denali disappearance, at least 5 other climbers reported hearing unexplained radio chatter near the pass. Mostly brief, indecipherable bursts. A few caught fragments of English words. Cold, stop, can't see. Park officials installed new frequency jammers in 2020, citing signal contamination from geological interference. Turner's widow later organized a memorial climb. She reached the same altitude where Michael's beacon had last transmitted. She reported a sudden temperature drop, though her instruments showed no change. In her later interview, she said softly, "It was like he was still up there, waiting." Psychologists call it grief echo. But those who've worked Denali long enough know that silence carries memory. Even today, climbers speak of the mountain as if it's alive, patient, watching, and occasionally hungry. The official record closes the Turner case as unsolved. No remains, no equipment, no verified cause of death. But those who study Denali's archives know the pattern, the missing, the radio calls, the strange lights. Across Alaska, the wilderness hides things no search team ever finds. Every year, hundreds vanish into this frozen world, their last footprints erased by wind within minutes. The mountain doesn't shout. It whispers, patient and unrelenting. When the snow thaws, sometimes it gives back fragments. A glove, a camera, a voice caught in static, just enough to remind us that something still watches from those white ridges. And maybe, when the storm rolls in and the fog folds over the peaks, the mountain isn't empty at all. Maybe it remembers everyone who's ever climbed too high and listened too closely to the wind. Along the desolate coast of southern Alaska, where icy mist rises off the Kenai Peninsula, lies the ghost town of Portlock, or what's left of it. Founded in the early 1900s as a salmon cannery village, Portlock was once home to nearly 200 workers, families, and fishermen. But by 1950, the entire population vanished without trace. Government documents list the evacuation as voluntary relocation due to economic decline. Yet, the physical evidence tells another story. Homes were abandoned with food still on tables, tools left mid-use, and personal belongings scattered as if people fled in terror. Local oral history records something darker. Strange noises in the forest, huge humanoid footprints near the stream, and bodies found mutilated in the shallows. In 2019, an independent research group known as the Alaska Anomalous Field Team revisited Portlock to document the site for a documentary. What they uncovered would revive one of the state's oldest and most chilling mysteries. The team of 5 researchers arrived in August 2019, led by field investigator Dr. Hannah Cross, a cultural anthropologist from Anchorage. She was joined by cameraman Eli Brooks, audio specialist Nate Perez, historian Mark Benton, and local guide Jonas Killick, a lifelong resident of Seldovia, familiar with the Portlock area. They reached the site by skiff, navigating choppy waters and fog so thick the horizon disappeared. The beach was littered with whale bones and rusted machinery, remnants of the old cannery. According to Jonas, the area had been avoided by locals for decades. "You don't camp here," he warned on the first night. "You don't even speak the name after dark." The group laughed it off, until their first evening recording session captured something strange. As the sun dipped below the gray horizon, the directional mic picked up low, rhythmic thuds coming from deep within the tree line. At first, they assumed it was driftwood falling. But the pattern, 3 strikes, pause, 2 more, repeated several times throughout the night. By morning, one of their camera tripods had been knocked over, and heavy footprints, barefoot, human-sized but impossibly wide, led straight into the forest. On the second day, the team followed the footprints inland, guided by Jonas. The trail wound through moss-covered fir trees and thick underbrush, where the air felt unnaturally still. About a mile in, they found an old logging path, overgrown but intact, and what appeared to be the remains of a small cabin collapsed under snow damage. Inside, Hannah discovered rusted cans, a broken lantern, and a single wooden cross nailed above the doorway. But what caught her attention most was the deep gouge marks carved into the back wall, long, uneven slashes reaching nearly 7 feet high. Eli filmed the discovery while Nate recorded ambient sound. The moment they exited the cabin, the forest went silent. No birds, no wind, only the faint hum of their equipment. Then, from somewhere beyond the ridge, came a sound that froze them in place. A low guttural scream, distant but powerful enough to echo through the valley. Jonas muttered a single word under his breath. Nantinak. When asked what it meant, he refused to answer, his face pale and tight with fear. That evening, as the group reviewed their footage near the beach, strange noises began again. Rhythmic knocks, distant wails, and something that sounded like dragging along the gravel shore. At 11:47 p.m., Eli's thermal camera detected a large heat signature moving at the tree line, approximately 9 feet tall and distinctly upright. When he zoomed in, the figure disappeared, leaving the camera briefly glitching with static interference. Jonas refused to stay another night and retreated to his skiff, insisting he'd wait offshore until sunrise. At 2:10 a.m., Nate's field recorder captured a voice whispering near his tent. Low, breathy, and unmistakably human. The words were never fully clear, but the final syllables resembled, "Go now." When they checked the perimeter at dawn, there were deep impressions in the wet sand, not prints, but kneeling marks, as if something heavy had crouched beside the tents in the dark. On August 17th, Jonas was gone. His skiff was still anchored offshore, engine untouched, supplies intact. The team found his flashlight lying half submerged in the shallows, still on. Hannah tried to radio for help, but their signal wouldn't transmit. Every frequency buzzed with distorted static that occasionally formed words, something like, "Leave, leave." Eli hiked to higher ground to try a satellite call. His footage shows him walking through fog, the audio recording faint, irregular knocks echoing from multiple directions. The last image from his camera is a blurred frame of treetops shaking violently before the feed cuts to black. They found the camera an hour later, lying near the old cannery foundation, lens cracked, no sign of Eli. By evening, the remaining three, Hannah, Nate, and Mark, packed what little gear they could carry and decided to leave at first light. But Portlock wasn't finished with them. As they prepared to depart, Hannah insisted on one final sweep of the cannery ruins for Eli. Inside the decaying structure, the stench of rot and salt was overpowering. They found piles of rusted fish barrels, chains, and a single wooden crate marked Port Chatham 1949. Inside were dozens of personal belongings, wristwatches, wallets, shoes, all appearing decades old. Mark discovered a faded ledger book inside a filing cabinet. The final entry, dated September 12, 1949, read, "Another man gone. Same as the others. No blood, no trail. We're leaving this place by dawn," moments later. Nate called out. He'd found something carved into the concrete near the waterline. 3 long vertical gouges, identical to those seen in the cabin wall. That's when they heard it again. That same deep, resonant scream rolling through the fog, closer this time, shaking loose rust from the ceiling beams. They ran for the shore, hearts pounding. But their skiff and Jonas were gone. The team fled inland, hoping to find a high vantage for a distress signal. They hiked until dusk, the terrain muddy and slick. Behind them, intermittent crashing sounds followed, heavy steps pacing just out of sight. When darkness fell, they took refuge in an abandoned shack. Nate set up a camera on a tripod, facing the forest. At 1:03 a.m., the footage shows branches bending as if pushed aside by something massive. Then, a dark shape passes across the lens, towering, broad-shouldered, and humanoid. Hannah whispers, "Is that a bear?" But the outline doesn't match. The creature pauses, turns toward the camera, and 2 faint reflections, like eyes, catch the light. Then, sudden static. The next frame is of Nate, the following morning, pale and shaking. "It was standing right there," he says, "watching us breathe." Only 2 of them remained by the next evening, Hannah and Mark. Nate's sleeping bag was torn open, his camera missing. His footprints led into the woods, ending abruptly near the creek. No blood, no struggle, just gone. Hannah's final voice log, later found on her waterproof recorder, captures her whispering through sobs. "It mimics us." I heard Mark's voice outside, but he was asleep. Minutes later, the sound of shuffling feet, then the recorder drops. The final 30 seconds are filled with a low growl and something dragging across gravel, followed by a faint whisper. Still here. Neither Hannah nor Mark was ever located. Their footage, discovered months later by a Coast Guard recovery team, remains classified. In April 2020, the Coast Guard conducted an official recovery operation after a private distress beacon from Portlock transmitted briefly before shutting off. They found 2 tents collapsed near the old cannery, 1 camera tripod, and fragments of memory cards. Footage recovered showed brief flashes, fog, the beach, and a tall figure retreating into the trees. The Alaska State Troopers listed the team's disappearance as unexplained loss due to hazardous terrain. Locals from Seldovia, however, quietly revived an old warning. Don't go to Portlock after the sun sets. The land remembers what we took to this day. Fishermen still claim to see flickering lights on the shore when passing by at night. And sometimes, the echo of hammering, like someone rebuilding a town long gone. The Portlock incident officially remains unsolved. But among Alaska's coastal communities, the name still carries weight. Whispered by old sailors and passed through generations like a curse. Some say the villagers fled because of isolation, others because of something that stalked the forest long before they arrived. Whatever haunted Portlock in 1949 may never have left. The ruins still stand, half swallowed by moss and sea fog, visited only by the curious or the foolish. And when the tide rises and wind rolls through the cannery's hollow corridors, locals swear you can still hear hammering, voices, and distant footsteps pacing the shore. Maybe it's the wind, or maybe it's the echo of a town that refused to die quietly. In the remote reaches of Alaska's North Slope lies Barrow, now known as Utqiagvik, a windswept coastal settlement resting on the edge of the Arctic Ocean. Once, during the Cold War era, it was home to several U.S. military outposts monitoring Soviet radio traffic and weather patterns. One of these, designated Station 114, was abandoned abruptly in 1973 after an unspecified equipment malfunction. For decades, its remains sat frozen beneath layers of snow and sea ice, unreachable except by snowcat or airlift. In 2018, a small research team from Anchorage University, 3 scientists and a local guide, embarked on a mission to document the remains for a government-funded study on permafrost decay and Cold War infrastructure. The lead researcher, Dr. Evelyn Rourke, noted that no official blueprints of the facility existed in public archives. Still, they were confident they'd find a crumbling building, take photos, and return within 2 days. But the locals had warned them otherwise. Elders from the nearby Inupiat community spoke of the hum beneath the snow, a low, vibrating sound that began after the base closed. The research team brushed it off as folklore until they began their long trek north under a gray, unending sky, unaware of the signal that still pulsed somewhere deep beneath the ice. It took nearly 10 hours for the team to locate the faint outline of Station 114. What they found was not a ruin. It was half buried, yet oddly intact. The steel doors, though rusted, stood sealed. The guide, Noah Kaeluk, insisted they mark the area and return. But Dr. Rourke pressed forward. They unearthed the entryway using thermal drills until a metallic groan echoed from below, like the building itself exhaled after decades. Inside, the air was unnaturally dry and still. The power seemed dead, yet some corridor lights faintly glowed, running on reserves that shouldn't have lasted half a century. The group filmed everything, tagging samples and surfaces, until they came upon a corridor painted in military green, marked Communications in faded lettering. At 22:13 that night, they set up camp inside the mess hall. Their logs record the first mention of the noise, a distant rhythmic hum, like a heartbeat buried deep in the concrete. Evelyn described it as a low oscillating frequency impossible to locate, vibrating through the walls. The team assumed it was the wind trapped in ventilation shafts. But as they would soon discover, no wind had entered that station for decades. On the second day, they mapped the first 2 levels of Station 114. The facility extended far deeper than any Cold War blueprint suggested. Dr. Rourke's assistant, Liam Mercer, discovered an unmarked stairwell leading down to what looked like a sealed laboratory. The steel hatch bore no signage, only a small rectangular plate engraved with an unfamiliar symbol, concentric circles with an arrow piercing through. Evelyn tried to radio Anchorage for status updates, but all communications failed. Even satellite uplinks showed interference. Bursts of static aligned with the same pulse of that ever-present hum. Noah refused to descend further, muttering that the ice remembers what's buried. But Evelyn was determined. They forced the hatch open by midday. Beyond it lay a corridor of frost-coated glass panels containing large cylindrical tanks, empty but smeared from the inside. The team recorded strange readings on their instruments. Elevated electromagnetic fields, rapid temperature fluctuations, and sporadic bursts of static echoing through their recorders. Their footage ends abruptly as a sound grows louder, not mechanical, but organic, like breathing amplified through metal ducts. In her last audible note before the camera cut, Evelyn whispered, "It's coming from below." Against Noah's pleas, the 3 researchers descended another level through a freight elevator shaft. It was here that they discovered the lower research sector, a labyrinth of rooms with sealed containment doors and strange circular wiring carved into the floors. A faded sign on the control panel read, "Project Aurora, active." Power flickered on and off, illuminating cryptic notes pinned across the control room. One sheet read, "Maintain the signal. It stabilizes them." Another, "Do not cut transmission during dark cycles." Evelyn's voice notes describe her growing realization that Station 114 wasn't purely a listening post. It had been part of an experimental frequency testing program. The hum they'd heard was intentional. As they explored, their sensors picked up bursts of ultra-low frequency sound, matching the Earth's natural resonance, a tone used in classified communications during the Cold War. But here, it seemed to have another purpose. Liam theorized the frequency was being used to manipulate or preserve biological material. At 1842, the hum grew so intense that their equipment malfunctioned. The lights dimmed, and for one chilling moment, they heard footsteps in the corridor. Slow, dragging, and uneven, deep in the core of the outpost. The team discovered what the documents called the Black Chamber. Inside stood a massive circular transmitter, half collapsed under ice. Wires extended from it like veins, leading to frozen containment pods around the perimeter. Each pod contained something unidentifiable, human in shape, but distorted. Evelyn's last journal entry reads, "These aren't test subjects. They look preserved mid-motion, eyes open, no decay." The power surged unexpectedly, and the transmitter activated for the first time in decades. The hum became a deafening roar, shaking the structure. Liam screamed that the pods were vibrating before the camera feed turned to static. When it resumed, the chamber lights flickered violently, revealing one of the pods cracked open, its contents gone. No further communication was received from the team after that night. Their radio beacons, however, continued to transmit faint pulses, a repeating tone identical to the frequency once used by the U.S. Air Force in the early 1970s. When the research team failed to check in after 72 hours, a recovery operation was initiated by the Alaska Search and Rescue Division. The crew, 6 men equipped with snowcats and thermal drones, arrived 3 days later under severe Arctic storm conditions. They found the camp outside Station 114 still standing, tents intact, fuel drums full, and tracks leading to the open hatch beneath the snow. Inside, the facility was deathly silent. No power, no hum. The search logs describe a metallic residue coating the walls, and frost burned in circular patterns as if something had radiated heat from within. The first chamber was undisturbed, but deeper in, searchers found equipment smashed, notebooks scattered, and Dr. Rourke's digital recorder frozen mid-playback. When investigators replayed it, they heard only a rhythmic thumping, similar to a heartbeat, accompanied by faint static and a single word whispered repeatedly. "Below." The team proceeded down the elevator shaft, but stopped at the second level when Geiger counters spiked abnormally. They withdrew by nightfall. Only one photograph from the mission was ever released publicly, showing a blurred corridor with a shadowed figure at the far end, though officials later claimed it was an optical illusion caused by lens frost. Months later, a secondary expedition recovered the team's personal effects. Among them were several waterproof field notebooks preserved in frost. One belonged to Liam Mercer, filled with frantic entries dated hours before their disappearance. His final page read, "The hum stopped. The silence hurts. Something moved when the frequency failed." Another notebook contained calculations and a sketch of concentric rings labeled Signal Stabilization Field. At the bottom, Evelyn had scrolled, "It's not a signal, it's containment." When these materials reached Anchorage, government analysts confiscated most of the contents under national security review. Independent researchers who briefly viewed the notes confirmed references to low-frequency bioresonance, a field of experimentation once rumored to be tied to Cold War sleeper projects in Alaska. A week after the notebooks were retrieved, one of the recovery crewmen, James Dalton, reported persistent migraines and auditory hallucinations. He told colleagues he could still hear the hum even after leaving Barrow. 2 days later, Dalton was found wandering barefoot outside his home, incoherent and frostbitten, claiming something came back through the signal. By February 2019, satellite monitoring systems over the Arctic Circle began detecting unexplained bursts of low-frequency sound. The same tone logged from Station 114 decades prior. The bursts occurred at irregular intervals, each lasting approximately 8 minutes. Civilian researchers from the University of Fairbanks publicly requested data access, but federal agencies classified all recordings within days. Amateur radio operators, however, began reporting strange interference patterns around 6.5 Hz, a frequency inaudible to humans, yet known to induce anxiety and nausea in test environments. In Barrow, several residents claimed to feel the ground vibrate at night, accompanied by dogs howling toward the coastline. One fisherman described seeing blue light under the ice, moving parallel to the shore. Though dismissed as aurora refraction, the event matched the timing of one recorded signal burst. When questioned, NOAA officials denied any atmospheric cause, stating only that the disturbance originated below the ice shelf. By spring, all access routes to the area surrounding Station 114 were restricted under environmental protection orders. But satellite imagery later showed faint structural outlines, as though new tunnels had formed beneath the snow. Declassified documents obtained through a Freedom of Information request later revealed the official response. The report, labeled Project Aurora, Site Closure Protocol, confirmed that Station 114 had been built not only for communications testing, but for biofrequency containment and behavioral modulation experiments. The memo's final paragraph read, "Under no circumstances shall the core transmitter be deactivated. Sustained resonance maintains biological stasis This statement raised more questions than answers. What biological stasis referred to was never explained. The files ended abruptly with a redacted section titled Incident 114F. When a journalist from Anchorage tried to investigate, he vanished en route to Barrow. His rental vehicle was found abandoned near the Dalton Highway. Doors open, engine running, GPS frozen mid-route to coordinates matching Station 114's last known location. His camera, later recovered, contained 27 photos of snow and one final blurred image. A humanoid outline emerging from a fissure in the ice. Today, locals in Barrow still speak of the nights when the ice hums, a vibration that rattles windows and unsettles the seabirds. Military aircraft occasionally patrol the area, and official maps now omit the coordinates of Station 114 entirely. Audio analysts who've studied leaked recordings of the frequency claim to detect faint human voices embedded within the signal, overlapping whispers repeating fragments of words. Cold, below, awake. Experts dismiss it as pareidolia, but others believe it's a residual transmission, a recording of those who never left the outpost. Dr. Rourke, Liam Mercer, and Noah Kaluk were never found. Their equipment, however, occasionally emits low bursts of power when recharged, even after years in storage. Each pulse matches the rhythm of that same deep, endless hum. Some mysteries are buried by snow and silence, but in Alaska's far north, silence itself may be the loudest warning. The hum beneath the ice has not stopped. It merely waits for someone else to listen. Tucked deep within Alaska's Kenai Peninsula lies the ghost settlement of Portlock, once a thriving fishing and mining community during the early 1900s. Today, it's a desolate shoreline surrounded by dense spruce forests, steep cliffs, and an overwhelming silence. Few venture there willingly. Locals still speak of the Portlock curse, the unexplained exodus that left the entire town abandoned in the 1950s. In October 2020, a small documentary crew from Seattle, led by investigative journalist Clara Whitmore, set out to uncover what truly happened in Portlock. The team of 5 planned to spend a week on site, collecting environmental data, interviewing locals, and exploring the remnants of the old cannery. Their arrival was recorded in drone footage. Mist crawling across gray waters, broken cabins leaning toward the sea, and the guttural cry of distant ravens. The village seemed trapped in time, untouched yet watching. An elderly fisherman from nearby Seldovia had warned them. Portlock doesn't stay empty. It watches back, but like so many who came before, Clara and her crew dismissed it as folklore. They didn't yet know that they were about to rediscover why an entire town vanished, without a trace. On their first night, the crew set up base in one of the larger structures, an old bunkhouse that still smelled faintly of salt and rust. They powered generators, arranged camera traps, and installed motion sensors along the forest edge. Clara recorded her first log entry, noting the unnatural stillness. Even the waves sound distant here. At 2:17 a.m., one motion camera captured movement near the tree line, a tall silhouette passing between the trees. When they checked the feed the next morning, the footage showed no animal shape, no clear outline, only distortion, as if the lens had warped mid-frame. While filming the coastline later that day, sound engineer David Collins noticed deep impressions in the sand, resembling massive footprints. Each was nearly twice the length of a man's boot. Locals had told stories of the Nantianak, a creature said to stalk Portlock's outskirts during the final years before the abandonment. Clara dismissed it as myth, but her assistant Jonas seemed uneasy. By nightfall, the fog thickened to the point where their flashlights barely pierced the air. And beneath that heavy silence, they began to hear something new. A deep, rhythmic thud echoing from the direction of the forest, like something walking beneath the earth. On the third morning, Clara and Jonas hiked inland to locate the old mining tunnels referenced in historical records. The forest grew denser with each step, trees gnarled and blackened by time. Nearly a mile in, they discovered a strange totem carved into a cedar trunk. It wasn't traditional Inupiat or Tlingit craftsmanship. Its markings were crude, almost ritualistic. The carving depicted a wide-mouthed figure with hollow eyes, surrounded by smaller etched shapes that looked like humans being pulled downward. A weathered plaque nearby read simply, "We warned them." As they documented the site, Jonas mentioned feeling vibrations through the ground, faint but rhythmic. Clara recorded ambient audio, capturing a low-frequency hum that didn't match any environmental source. When they returned to camp, David noticed the generators flickering again. Their audio recorders played back bursts of static, followed by a soft, distant breathing sound. The noise seemed directional, as though the recorder had captured something standing close behind them. That night, one of their thermal cameras went offline for exactly 13 minutes. When it resumed, the image showed the same carved totem, now freshly gouged with new claw marks that hadn't been there hours before. The following day brought heavy rain and low visibility. While attempting to reset their camera traps, the crew discovered a new set of prints, enormous, human-like but distorted, leading from the tree line toward the creek. The depth of each impression suggested something heavy, far heavier than any bear. Jonas followed the tracks for over 200 meters before they simply stopped in the middle of a clearing, ending abruptly as though the creature had vanished mid-stride. Beneath the mud, Clara noticed fragments of broken glass, remnants of what appeared to be a camera lens, decades old, preserved by the cold. She pocketed it for later analysis. As the storm worsened, the team retreated indoors, but the structure groaned violently under the wind. Around midnight, a loud crash echoed from the far end of the building. One of the exterior walls had been struck. They rushed outside, finding the side planks bent outward, not inward. Whatever hit the building had come from within. That evening, Clara examined the old glass fragment she had found. It matched a lens used in the 1940s film cameras, the kind used by Portlock's original inhabitants. Later, in the attic of the bunkhouse, the crew discovered a small wooden crate filled with rusted tools, personal items, and several weather-damaged film reels. They set up a portable projector and began to play one. Despite flickers of decay, the footage showed clear scenes of Portlock's final days. Fishermen packing supplies, families boarding boats, and a group of men carrying rifles into the forest. Halfway through, the film cut to something jarring. The same forest path Clara had just walked. The camera shook violently, and in one frame, a massive blurred shape crossed the screen. The following frame showed nothing but empty trees. As they watched, the generator cut out. The air grew still. Then, faintly, from outside, came the echo of the same low hum captured in their earlier recordings. Only this time, it carried a distinct rhythm, like breath drawn through the trees. By the fifth night, the weather turned violent. Wind screamed through the valley like a living thing, and the fog pressed against the cabin windows so thick it looked solid. Clara ordered everyone inside, but their sensors began triggering one by one. Movement detected across every camera simultaneously. The live feed displayed only static and faint streaks of motion. Then, for 6 seconds, One camera captured something standing just beyond the window. A tall, human-shaped figure, broad-shouldered and completely still. Its eyes reflected the generator light like a predator's. David shut everything down to avoid attracting attention. The crew waited in silence, listening as heavy footsteps circled the cabin. Boards creaked, tools clattered to the ground outside. The air pressure dropped abruptly, ears popped, and then all sound stopped. When dawn broke, the forest looked untouched, yet deep grooves were carved into the wooden siding of the cabin, running nearly 8 feet high. Jonas found a scrap of torn fabric snagged on the outer wall. Thick, coarse, like animal hide, but arranged in fibers resembling human muscle. He sealed it in a sample bag, though he confessed later in his notes. It felt warm. Later that morning, Clara followed a map drawn on one of the recovered 1940s journals. It indicated a tunnel entrance behind the old cannery, used as a shortcut to the mining shafts. The entrance was partially collapsed, but still passable. Against the others' advice, she and Jonas descended with 2 cameras and a flare kit. Inside, the tunnels twisted downward into bedrock, lined with rusted pipes and tracks from an old ore cart. Rough etchings marked the walls, handprints, dozens of them, pressed deep into stone. The air temperature rose unnaturally the deeper they went, accompanied by a faint pulsing echo. Near the lowest chamber, they discovered a section where the ceiling had burst inward from above. Something massive had forced its way through. In the center lay what appeared to be remnants of human equipment. Boots, a broken pickaxe, and part of a rib cage fused with dark organic residue. Jonas vomited. Clara filmed silently. When they turned to leave, the hum returned, louder now, vibrating through the floor. The sound rose into an animalistic growl, deep, guttural, and wrong. They ran, leaving their gear behind. Only Clara's handheld camera made it back to the surface. That night, Jonas couldn't sleep. His notes grew erratic, handwriting slanted, words fragmented. It's still in the tunnels. It doesn't like noise around 3 a.m. The sound returned, faint at first, then louder, until the cabin shook. David saw Jonas step outside with his flashlight. He called out, but Jonas didn't answer. Clara followed moments later and found the beam of his flashlight lying in the mud, still on. Tracks led toward the forest and abruptly stopped by the creek, where the soil had been churned into a wide circular depression. No body, no blood, just silence. By morning, the weather cleared, but the forest seemed wrong. Birds absent, air heavy. Clara reported the incident by satellite phone, though her message was distorted by interference. The signal cut halfway through her transmission, ending with a single phrase, "Alaskan not alone here." Rescue teams were delayed by worsening conditions, leaving Clara and the remaining 2 crew members stranded. Over the next 24 hours, the sound would return intermittently, always closer, always louder. When the rescue team finally arrived 4 days later, they found the village completely deserted. The cabin was torn open from the inside. The crew's equipment lay scattered across the ground, cameras smashed, supplies untouched. There was no sign of Clara or her team. Inside the main cabin, investigators recovered a single waterproof case containing a digital camcorder. The final file, time-stamped October 23rd, 3:48 a.m., showed Clara sitting in the dark. Her face was pale, eyes fixed beyond the lens. Behind her, faint shapes moved near the window, too large and tall to be human. She whispered, "It's not a creature. It's the ground. It's alive beneath us." Moments later, the footage shook violently. A roar erupted, low, resonant, like the sound of tectonic plates grinding together. The image blurred, light flared white, and then nothing. The video ends with 3 seconds of faint motion. The lens pointed toward the door as something huge moved past, blocking all light. Portlock remains empty to this day. The U.S. Forest Service officially lists it as historically hazardous terrain due to unstable soil and unexplained subsidence events. Yet fishermen still claim to hear deep vibrations coming from the coastline, a low hum that rolls through the ground like distant thunder. In 2021, seismic sensors near the site recorded faint rhythmic tremors matching a 0.7 Hz frequency, identical to the pulse heard in Clara's audio files. Experts blamed melting permafrost. Locals weren't so sure. Several explorers who have visited since reported seeing strange distortions in the fog, outlines that vanish when approached, the air itself bending as if displaced by something vast and unseen. The final recovered transmission from Clara's equipment contains a single chilling line, her voice barely audible through static. It was never abandoned. We woke it today. No one lives within miles of Portlock. And when the wind shifts just right, some say the ground still breathes. In 2019, maritime surveillance teams off the coast of Maine began detecting an unregistered radio signal near an old decommissioned lighthouse known as Briar Point Light. The structure had been inactive since 1972 after the final keeper, Edward Hale, vanished without trace during a winter storm. The signal was faint, repeating every 12 hours, an old distress code. Mayday. Fog coming in. Please respond, the strangest part. The message used Hale's original call sign, one that had been retired for nearly 50 years. Curious, a local filmmaker named Lena Corbett assembled a small crew to investigate the origin of the signal. They planned to spend 3 nights documenting the lighthouse's interior, comparing the modern transmission to archived recordings from the 1960s. As their boat approached the island, fog rolled in abruptly, unnaturally thick, swallowing the sun within minutes. The radio crackled, and a male voice whispered through static, "Welcome back, Lena." None of them had transmitted a word yet. The team arrived shaken, but continued to the base of the cliff, where Briar Point Light stood silent and leaning toward the sea, its windows black and its lantern room flickering faintly. Though no power cables had been connected in decades. Inside, the air smelled of salt and oil. Dust layered the floor. Yet someone had recently cleared a narrow path leading to the spiral stairs. At the control desk, Lena found a leather-bound journal wrapped in plastic. Edward Hale's last logbook, dated January 1972. The final pages described a strange phenomenon. Light pulses when fog thickens. I hear voices outside, calling from the sea. They know my name that night. As the crew powered their backup generator, the lighthouse's old Fresnel lens began to rotate slowly on its own. The light projected a narrow beam across the fog, cutting through darkness that should have been opaque. Through the static of the radio came the same distress signal, followed by a whisper overlapping their frequency. "Turn back the light." Lena reviewed the journal again and found a pressed photograph between its pages. A group of lighthouse keepers from 1948, including Hale. But when she shined her flashlight on the photo, one figure's face appeared faintly burned, replaced by a shadowy blur that resembled a hollow mask. That night, waves crashed violently below, and for the first time, the light atop the tower swung toward the sea. Not rotating evenly, but tracking something moving across the water. At 2:43 a.m., sound technician Owen detected a faint male voice layered within the static of their recorder. It repeated the words, "Keep the light on." When he slowed the playback, A second, quieter voice emerged behind it, a woman's, whispering, "He's still down there." The team followed the voice up to the lantern room. The fog was thicker than ever, pressing against the glass like a living wall. The beam now illuminated what looked like faint outlines in the mist, as if dozens of figures were standing at the edge of visibility. Owen swore he saw movement on the staircase below. When Lena turned her camera, there was no one there. But the steps were wet. Fresh seaweed scattered across the metal grating. Then the foghorn, which hadn't worked in 50 years, bellowed once, low and distorted, shaking the entire tower. The generator flickered off, plunging them into darkness. Somewhere below, the old mechanical winch creaked, and the rotating light resumed, slowly, without power. That's when the radio whispered one final time before cutting to silence. "You shouldn't have come back." By sunrise, the fog hadn't lifted. The sea was silent, except for the occasional hollow groan of waves striking the cliff below. Lena decided to document the lower chambers of the lighthouse. The keeper's quarters, fuel storage, and maintenance tunnels carved into the rock beneath. The crew followed her down the spiral staircase, which grew slick with condensation and rust. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. Halfway down, they noticed something strange. The walls were damp, not from rain, but from seawater seeping through in rhythmic pulses, as if the building itself were breathing. At the base, they found a heavy iron door that hadn't been opened in decades. Owen pried it loose, and the stench of brine and decay flooded out. Inside was a small stone chamber with an old generator, shelves of oil canisters, and, in the far corner, a wooden chair facing the wall. On the wall above it, scratched into the concrete, were the words, "He kept the light on too long." Fresh scrape marks surrounded the message. It hadn't been there in the 1972 archive photos Lena reviewed before the trip. Someone, or something, had carved it recently. Just as they began recording footage, the radio crackled again. Static, then Edward Hale's voice, unmistakably his from the original 1960s logs, whispering, "They don't want the light off." Later that day, Lena discovered an old 8mm film canister, sealed inside a rusted locker near the base of the tower. The label read, "Inspection Footage, January 1972. Against her better judgment, she decided to view it using a portable projector they'd brought for archival comparisons. The film opened with shaky footage of the lighthouse interior, Edward Hale documenting storm damage. But halfway through, something shifted. The lens turned toward the sea, and faint figures could be seen walking across the water, their shapes distorted by fog and rain. Hale's breathing grew rapid. The camera shook violently, and then the screen went black. When the film ended, the sound of water dripping echoed from somewhere deep below the floorboards. Owen followed it to a rusted drain cover, and beneath it was something shining. A brass pocket watch, engraved with Hale's initials. The moment Owen touched it, the foghorn blasted again, shaking dust from the rafters. All their electronic equipment, cameras, radios, even their watches, shut off simultaneously. Lena looked toward the lens room, where the rotating beam was still moving slowly. But now, each rotation seemed to pause briefly over their exact location, as if the light were watching them. By evening, the fog had grown so thick that even the sea was invisible from the gallery. The team decided to spend the night on the upper level, barricading the doors and windows. Lena documented the events, whispering updates into her handheld microphone. "Something's mimicking our voices," she recorded. "When we call out, it answers. but always slightly delayed, like an echo underwater. At 1 a.m., the generator stopped again. The tower plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the lens room above. A low vibration trembled through the floorboards, rhythmic, like footsteps circling the lighthouse from outside. Then the voices began. Not screams, not shouts, whispers, hundreds of them, blending into the wind. Owen pressed his ear to the wall and swore he could hear words forming. Turn the light back, or they'll come in. Moments later, something struck the outer glass of the lantern room. A wet, heavy impact. When Lena climbed the stairs, she saw a handprint, pale and slick, pressed against the outside of the glass 30 feet above the sea. The following morning, Owen was gone. His sleeping bag lay unzipped beside the camera tripod. A trail of wet footprints led from his bed to the spiral staircase, stopping abruptly at the landing. The others searched every room, calling his name. No response. The fog was even thicker now, swallowing sound and distance alike. Lena found his recorder near the doorway. The last 10 seconds captured a sound like waves crashing, followed by Owen whispering, "I see the light below the water." The team debated leaving immediately, but the boat anchored at the dock had vanished. Only frayed ropes and disturbed sand remained. With no radio connection and visibility near zero, they were trapped. That evening, the lighthouse lens stopped turning. The beam froze, pointing directly out to sea. In the fog, Lena saw faint shapes again. A circle of figures, motionless, surrounding the island. She realized the beam wasn't warning ships anymore. It was keeping something away. By the third night, the air inside Briar Point Light had turned cold enough to fog their breath. The fog outside no longer moved naturally. It pulsed, expanding and retracting like the tide. Lena noticed the old radio light blinking again. Against all odds, the system had powered itself back on. When she tuned the dial, the distress signal repeated. The same Mayday loop. But now, each transmission ended with a chilling new line. Light below. Light below. He's still waiting. Lena and the last remaining crew member, Marcus, descended to the base once more. The floorboards were wet, vibrating softly with each transmission. They followed the sound to the drain where they had found Hale's pocket watch. Water was rising from beneath it, glowing faintly, as if something luminous was deep below. Marcus leaned in to capture footage when the light beneath rippled, not like water, but like something breathing. Then came a voice, unmistakably Hale's. "Keep it burning, or they come through." Suddenly, the lighthouse above them roared to life. Every lamp, every long dead wire flickered bright white, searing the darkness. Outside, the fog churned violently, shapes moving within it, retreating from the glow. Moments later, the generator exploded, plunging the entire lighthouse into blackness. The beam above ceased, and the fog pressed hard against the windows, muffling every sound except the sea's rhythmic surge. Marcus ran for the stairs, but the door slammed shut on its own. Lena turned her flashlight toward the corner and froze. Standing by the rusted chair was a man in a soaked uniform, his face pale and blurred, his eyes like hollow lanterns filled with dim light. His lips moved without sound, mouthing a single word. "Stay." Lena screamed, backing toward the stairs, but the apparition stepped forward, leaving behind wet footprints that steamed faintly. The air grew heavy, thick with salt and static. When she looked back once more, the figure was gone. Only the dripping of seawater and the echo of metal creaking remained. Marcus vanished minutes later. The only trace left was his camera, found on the upper deck the following day, lens cracked, recording 12 minutes of fog. and a faint voice beneath it, whispering. He never left. When Coast Guard rescue teams finally reached Briar Point Island 5 days later, they found the lighthouse intact, its beacon burning steadily despite having no power source. The rescue log noted that the lantern emitted a faint mechanical hum and rotated every 12 seconds, precisely synchronized with the mysterious radio signal. No sign of Lena Corbett or her crew was ever discovered. However, investigators did recover her field recorder, preserved in a waterproof case beside the old logbook. The last entry on the tape captured a trembling voice saying, "We saw him. He's keeping the light on." The sea isn't dark anymore. Since then, the phantom broadcast continues. Maritime operators report hearing the same loop echoing across static channels during storms. Mayday. Fog coming in. Please respond. Every few months, a vessel off the coast of Maine reports seeing the faint glow of Briar Point light piercing through fog. Even though the island has been officially uninhabited for over 50 years. And sometimes, when they respond to the transmission, the voice answers back, calm, patient, and grateful. Thank you. I'll keep it on a little longer. In the far northwest of Alaska, tucked between the Kobuk River and the Brooks Range, lies the remnants of a town few have heard of. Prospect Creek Settlement, once a thriving mining outpost during the early 1970s pipeline construction boom. It was abruptly abandoned in 1982 after an unexplained series of collapses in the permafrost tunnels. In 2021, a research expedition from the University of Fairbanks returned to study methane emissions trapped beneath the ice. The team of 5 scientists set up camp above the frozen remains of the old settlement, armed with drilling rigs, sonar sensors, and environmental drones. What they didn't know was that temperatures in that area had dropped nearly 20 degrees lower than forecast, creating dense fog banks that came and went with unnatural rhythm. Lead researcher Dr. Ian Mercer wrote in his field log, "Something beneath the ice moves when we drill. Pressure sensors spike even when we're idle. It feels like the ground is hollow." The expedition's communication logs went silent on February 18, 2021. When a Ranger helicopter arrived 6 days later, their camp was empty, tents ripped open, equipment frozen mid-operation, and the drill rig still humming beneath 2 feet of new ice. The machine had bored into something deep below, and whatever it hit was no longer frozen. A month later, a small recovery crew led by Ranger Colin Reeves and 2 geologists arrived to locate the missing scientists. Their helicopter landed near the same coordinates, marked only by a cracked metal pole jutting out of the ice. Inside one of the tents, they found a half-buried satellite tablet, still recording environmental data. The logs showed abnormal seismic activity, rhythmic tremors, evenly spaced, as if something beneath the ice was moving in patterns. When night fell, the temperature plunged to minus 48 degrees Fahrenheit. The fog returned, thick, silent, and strangely warm in pockets, as if air were leaking from beneath the ice. Reeves noted a faint vibration underfoot, like machinery deep underground. At 2:17 a.m., the drone camera captured an outline moving under the frozen sheet near the drilling site. A dark humanoid shadow, long-limbed, distorted by layers of frost. The shape moved too smoothly to be an optical illusion. Reeves marked the footage as heat interference, but in his personal journal, he wrote something else entirely. It looked like a person walking under the ice, dragging something behind them. By morning, 2 of the motion sensors around camp had been ripped from their mounts, cables leading straight into the cracked ice trench. Image prompt: Nighttime Arctic research camp under aurora glow, fog curling around equipment, faint humanoid shape visible beneath ice sheet near drill hole. Flashlight beams cutting through darkness, cinematic ultra-realistic 16:9 tone. On the third day, the recovery team located the frozen drill rig, its control panel still humming faintly. Beneath it was a narrow opening about 4 feet wide, leading into what looked like a man-made tunnel preserved within permafrost. The walls were unnaturally smooth, carved as if with precision tools, not heavy machinery. Reeves ordered a small descent to document the structure. The ice refracted their headlamps, scattering pale blue light across long corridors that seemed to twist in impossible directions. 20 feet down, the team found old mining markers embedded in the walls. Faded logos of Prospect Creek Mining Company, last recorded active over 40 years earlier. But the tunnels extended far beyond any historical mining maps. They soon discovered signs of habitation. A rusted lunchbox, a metal thermos frozen to the wall, and near the far corner, a human boot with its laces torn out. When geologist Marlowe leaned close to examine it, his radio emitted a burst of static, followed by a faint voice. "We never left." The signal lasted 2 seconds before the feed went dead. Their surface contact confirmed no transmission had been made. Descending further, the air grew warmer instead of colder. Steam drifted through the narrow passages, condensing on their visors. Reeves's temperature gauge blinked erratically, the reading fluctuating between -20 degrees Fahrenheit and 60 degrees Fahrenheit within seconds. The tunnel widened into a massive chamber, nearly 40 feet across, lined with collapsed mining beams and rusted rails. But in the center stood something unnatural. A perfectly circular shaft, smooth and black, cutting straight down into the earth. It wasn't ice or rock, it looked like obsidian, but pulsed faintly from within, like the surface of deep water reflecting firelight. Geologist Marlowe recorded the structure, whispering, "No natural formation could do this. It's like the ice was melted from the inside out." They found another body nearby, or what was left of one. A human skeleton partially fused into the ice, its skull twisted upward as though screaming. Its ID tag identified him as Harold James, a miner listed missing from the original 1982 collapse. But the most chilling discovery was his hand, frozen mid-reach toward the shaft, clutching a rusted radio transmitter. Reeves picked it up. The second he did, the radio crackled to life and emitted a recording filled with frantic breaths, followed by a voice whispering, "Don't wake it." Then, silence. That night, Reeves and Marlowe camped inside the upper tunnel, unable to sleep. Around 2 a.m., their instruments began vibrating again, this time synchronized with a deep, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat resonating through the ice. They followed the sound back toward the chamber, noticing thin cracks spreading outward from the black shaft. Each pulse seemed to widen them slightly. Steam hissed upward, filling the air with a smell of iron and rot. Reeves attempted to radio the surface, but static drowned every transmission. Suddenly, from somewhere inside the shaft, came a faint metallic clang, like chains striking rock. Then, a whisper, echoing faintly. "It's warm down here." The temperature spiked. The ice on the walls began to melt in streaks, revealing more bones embedded beneath the surface. Miners, dozens of them, trapped mid-motion, faces twisted in frozen terror. When the next pulse hit, the lights flickered. For a split second, Marlowe saw something inside the black core, a humanoid silhouette pressed against the surface, as though trapped beneath glass. Its eyes glowed faint amber, staring upward. He screamed, stumbled back, and dropped his camera. The feed ended there. At dawn, Reeves forced the team to retreat to the surface. But as they climbed, the passage behind them groaned, ice cracking like thunder. The ground beneath their boots trembled violently, throwing them against the walls. When they emerged, the drill site was gone, replaced by a jagged sinkhole nearly 30 feet wide, spewing mist and faint red light. The helicopter above reported magnetic interference so strong their instruments spun uncontrollably. Reeves and Marlowe attempted to retrieve their gear, but the air around the hole distorted, like heat mirage on frozen ground. Inside, they could see movement, faint, fluid, rhythmic. Then, without warning, the fog rolled in again, sweeping across the valley in seconds. It carried with it a deep groaning sound, not wind, not machinery, something alive. Through the haze, Reeves spotted a figure at the far edge of the crater. Tall, human-shaped, but its limbs wrong, elongated. It moved slow, deliberate, and seemed to sink back into the ground when the fog thinned. When the rescue chopper tried to land, the fog surged again, forcing them back. 2 days later, a Ranger retrieval drone recovered Marlowe's dropped recorder from the tunnels. The device was damaged, but playable. The first minute captured the rhythmic pulse and cracking ice, but the last 30 seconds were indescribable. A low-frequency hum filled the chamber, followed by the sound of dripping water, and then a deep inhalation, like the first breath of something waking after centuries. Then came a voice, not human, not mechanical. Something layered, speaking in both English and another language simultaneously. We were buried to keep it quiet. After that, a shrill, distorted scream echoed through the recording before it cut to static. The ranger station marked the tape as classified, geological unknown source. Reeves was transferred to Anchorage for debriefing. He refused to discuss the details publicly, only saying one line to a reporter months later. "The ice isn't solid. It's just a door we forgot to lock." Weeks later, another research crew arrived to seal off the area and install geothermal monitors. When they reached the coordinates, the previous camp had disappeared entirely, not destroyed, not buried, just gone. The only thing left was the half-buried flag of the University of Fairbanks and a melted patch of ice in the exact shape of a human body. When they reviewed satellite data, they found that on the night Reeves's team vanished, the surface temperature spiked by 90 degrees for precisely 47 seconds, enough to melt an area half a mile wide. After that, the ice refroze instantly. Below the refrozen layer, sonar scans detected voids, hollow tunnels stretching for miles, forming a pattern that looked disturbingly symmetrical, like veins branching outward from the central shaft. The site was declared off-limits, listed officially as a geological instability zone. But locals from nearby Ambler Village claimed they could still see a red glow under the ice on clear nights. 6 months later, a maintenance satellite picked up an unscheduled transmission coming from the same coordinates. The signal contained a repeating message on a scrambled frequency. Audio analysts partially decoded it, a voice resembling Dr. Ian Mercer's from the missing research team. The message looped for 19 hours. "It's awake. It's moving toward the river." After the signal cut off, seismic sensors along the Kobuk River registered a series of deep tremors moving north, beneath solid ice. The pattern was linear, deliberate, as if something massive was traveling underground. Military aircraft scanned the area but detected no surface disturbance. The tremors ceased near the coast, where the land meets the Arctic Ocean. To this day, every February 18th, the date of the original disappearance, new micro-tremors occur in the same region, each stronger than the last, In 2023, a team conducting climate measurements over the region captured a thermal image that baffled NASA analysts. A circular heat signature spanning over half a mile, pulsing faintly under solid permafrost, like a living organism beneath glass. Local Inupiat elders, when shown the imagery, refused to comment, saying only, "The ground remembers what it buried." Today, Prospect Creek remains abandoned. The official cause of the scientists' disappearance is listed as environmental collapse, but internal documents reference subglacial motion of unknown origin. Every few weeks, automated sensors in the area record low-frequency vibrations, irregular yet rhythmic, like breathing. And when the midnight sun fades into full darkness, pilots flying overhead report seeing a faint red shimmer beneath the ice, spreading slowly toward the sea, as though something ancient beneath Alaska's frozen skin is stirring again. Nome, Alaska, a coastal town of just over 3,500 people, known for its brutal winters and the haunting beauty of the aurora borealis. For decades, stories have circulated among residents about strange disappearances during nights of heavy auroral activity. But in March 2019, the Nome Police Department received one of its most perplexing cases yet. The vanishing of radio technician Samuel Hayes, aged 42, last seen driving north toward the Teller Highway to repair a weather transmission tower. The last call from Samuel came at 8:47 p.m. when he told dispatch that the sky was alive with sound. His voice, recorded in the call logs, trembled as he described hearing a low humming emanating from the sky, one that caused the ground beneath his truck to vibrate. When search teams reached his vehicle the next day, they found it parked on the shoulder, engine still running, headlights aimed into a wall of snow. His toolbox sat open. His footprints led only 40 feet away. And then, nothing. Above the site, the aurora shimmered unnaturally bright that night. Witnesses later reported seeing flickering vertical columns of green light descending lower than usual, like curtains brushing the ground. And somewhere among those lights was a sound that didn't belong to nature. When the search team returned with sound equipment, they discovered that the local weather station's frequency, 147.8 megahertz, carried intermittent bursts of distortion. Every few hours, a rhythmic pulse similar to Morse code echoed through the static. Technician Linda Ross, who worked closely with Samuel, reviewed the waveform patterns and noticed something disturbing. The intervals weren't random. They formed a repeating signature, one almost identical to Samuel's personal broadcast tone used for test signals. The deeper they analyzed it, the clearer it became. It was his voice, whispering beneath the static. Slowed down, the audio revealed fragments of words. Cold, above, listen. Local residents began reporting strange sensations on nights when the aurora was strongest. Some claimed to hear low hums vibrating through their windows. Others saw silhouettes against the glowing sky, human-shaped shadows within the aurora curtains. Nome PD, working alongside the Alaska State Troopers, established a restricted perimeter around the Teller Highway area. The electromagnetic readings were unusually high, with instruments malfunctioning within a half-mile radius. They were beginning to suspect that Samuel hadn't simply wandered off. He may have been drawn toward something that responded to frequency itself. 2 weeks after Samuel's vanishing, Trooper Elena Brooks volunteered to accompany Linda Ross for another on-site reading. They carried spectrum analyzers and a thermal camera, documenting changes in electromagnetic behavior. At exactly 9:13 p.m., as the aurora brightened into an emerald haze, Their cameras captured a spike, followed by a faint, hovering column of static particles rising from the snow. It shimmered vertically, twisting like a rope of light. Linda's voice recorder picked up a faint whisper within the electromagnetic interference. The phrase repeated every 20 seconds. "We can hear you." Trooper Brooks' body cam footage abruptly cut out after that moment. When rescue arrived the next morning, only Linda was found, kneeling in the snow, disoriented, whispering incoherently. Her only written note, found in her pocket, read, "It's not light." Its sound frozen in motion, Brooks's body was never recovered. The footage remained corrupted, except for one final still frame showing the aurora bending unnaturally close to the ground, as if reacting to something unseen beneath the ice. In April 2019, Nome's local radio frequencies began receiving unauthorized transmissions late at night. Faint signals that lasted less than a minute. Locals who stayed up to record them claimed they sounded like overlapping human voices, whispering in unison. One ham radio enthusiast managed to isolate the transmission. After slowing it down, he found a message embedded in the signal. "The cold is a door. The light is the way the audio was traced to the same location where Samuel Hayes disappeared. The Teller Ridge area." Federal investigators from the FCC and Air Force Communications Division arrived to examine the phenomenon, but their instruments failed repeatedly due to magnetic interference. During their second night of observation, the aurora suddenly surged into violent motion, bending and pulsing like waves. Several team members claimed to see faces within the light, their mouths opening and closing silently in rhythm with the signal. That night, Nome experienced a total blackout. All power grids flickered and died for 6 minutes. When power returned, every recording device within a 5-mile radius had erased itself. Weeks later, a geological survey drone crashed just north of Teller Ridge. Its onboard camera, retrieved from the wreckage, captured footage of a glowing fissure in the ice roughly 50 feet wide. The air above it shimmered with static distortions, bending light unnaturally. The fissure emitted a low hum audible even through the drone's exterior microphone. Audio analysis matched it exactly to the same frequency pattern found in Samuel's final transmission. Locals began referring to the area as the static zone. Despite official denial, satellite images later revealed a temporary base camp built near the ridge by federal contractors, heavily guarded and without public explanation. Anonymous footage leaked months later showed tents lined with heavy magnetic shielding and multiple listening devices aimed directly at the fissure. What frightened viewers most, however, wasn't the setup. It was the final seconds of the clip, where a human figure of light emerged faintly from the ice, flickering like a projection trapped between worlds. The feed ended with a burst of white noise and a distorted voice saying, "He's not gone. He's changed." By early May, all investigations into the Nome phenomenon were abruptly halted. Official reports cited atmospheric interference and instrument failure. But local residents knew something had gone terribly wrong. Cargo planes were seen landing at Nome Airport late at night, carrying equipment marked with U.S. Geological Survey insignia. Within a week, all visible traces of the Teller Ridge site had been removed. Even the snow around the area was trucked away. A Freedom of Information Act request, filed later that year, revealed a single classified memo: unidentified EM resonance consistent with synthetic vocal activity. Recommend containment. No bodies were ever recovered. But several Nome residents claimed to see the same model of truck Samuel Hayes drove, parked briefly near the docks weeks later. Its engine was running, headlights on, but no one was inside. The aurora that night turned red. In 2020, a Nome fisherman discovered a waterproof container wedged under coastal ice. Inside was a single microcassette labeled A Record 7. When analyzed by a local journalist, it contained 5 minutes of distorted audio. At first, it sounded like a storm, wind and static. Then, faintly, a man's voice emerged. "If you're hearing this, the light listens. Don't look at it. Don't speak to it." Investigators confirmed the voice belonged to Samuel Hayes. His last words on record were calm, deliberate, almost hypnotic. As the recording continued, other voices joined his. Not echoes, but overlapping tones forming a chorus, as if dozens were speaking through him. The tape ended with a single chilling line: "We are part of the signal now." Experts ruled the sound as electromagnetic feedback, but many who listened to it claimed to feel their chest vibrate. A low hum that lingered long after the tape ended. That winter, Nome experienced one of the most intense auroral storms in decades. The sky erupted in sheets of green, red, and violet light, lasting over 12 continuous hours. Power grids across western Alaska failed intermittently, and strange audio frequencies were detected by amateur radio operators. In several towns, people claimed their phones turned on by themselves, displaying random strings of Morse code. At exactly 2:04 a.m., multiple witnesses described seeing columns of light spiral down into the tundra near the coast, where the fissure had once been. A fisherman filming the event captured a flickering silhouette of a man within the descending light. The video ended abruptly as the lens flared and the recording corrupted. That night, the hum returned, louder than ever, traveling through the ice like a heartbeat. Dogs across Nome howled for nearly an hour. Then, silence. By spring 2021, Nome returned to uneasy normalcy. The government officially attributed the events to solar magnetic anomalies, though residents avoided traveling near the Teller Ridge area. Researchers later found that radio frequencies between 147 to 150 megahertz continued to display irregular noise. Faint, whisper-like distortions embedded deep in static. The noise repeated cyclically every few hours, forming a distinct cadence, eerily similar to human breathing. To this day, hikers report hearing a low hum beneath the aurora, strongest near frozen lakes. Many describe the sensation of being watched from the sky, or worse, hearing their own name whispered back through the wind. Whatever occurred that winter left a permanent mark on Nome's electromagnetic landscape. The air itself seems alive. In 2023, a new weather monitoring tower was constructed near Teller Ridge. Engineers soon discovered that their instruments automatically synced to an unlisted channel every time the aurora appeared. The source: an old radio ID registered under Samuel Hayes. Though officially impossible, the system transmitted brief snippets of sound, faint static and whispers that matched his vocal signature. Nome residents now speak quietly about the voice in the aurora, a phenomenon where, on certain nights, the northern lights seem to hum just above human hearing, as if trying to communicate. And some say, if you listen closely enough, you can still hear Samuel calling through the light, guiding others into the sky. Hello, everyone. This has been Dark Fears. Tonight, we journeyed through Alaska's loneliest frontiers, places where isolation, cold, and silence blur the line between the natural and the unknown. From frozen tunnels that hum with movement to voices hidden within the aurora itself, these accounts remind us of one chilling truth. Some disappearances cannot be explained by bad weather or bad luck. The wilderness of Alaska guards its secrets well, And for every case documented, there are dozens more, sealed away in lost radio logs, forgotten camps, and reports buried beneath permafrost. If you've ever felt that strange pull in the dark, that whisper behind the wind, remember, the cold keeps what it takes. Share your thoughts or personal encounters in the comments below. And if you want more true investigations into the unknown, subscribe to Dark Fears, where every story hides a truth colder than ice. Until next time, keep your lights on and your eyes open.